Hi, my name is Luna, and this past Christmas Eve, I realized something I never thought I'd say out loud. Sometimes, the people who call you family are the very ones who never plan to make room for you. It started at the Harvest Glen Lodge, a beautiful rustic cabin-style event space nestled in the rolling hills of Napa Valley. It was Rachel's idea, my younger sister. She wanted something festive but elegant, and asked if I could help just a little with the logistics. Just a little turned into me fronting the entire deposit for the venue. Then came the catering. Then the decorations. Then the wine order when Rachel said Kyle, her boyfriend. It had a special palate, and it would be better if we curated the menu carefully. Of course, I paid. No questions. No receipts. No thank you. Because that's what I do. I show up. Quietly. Completely. It was late afternoon when I arrived right at golden hour. The light slanted beautifully through the vineyard hills. Catching the frost still clinging to the grass, I parked on the gravel lot behind the main lodge. Since I hadn't received the VIP parking instructions Rachel had promised to forward, not a big deal. Right, but somehow, these small forgotten things had become a pattern. Inside, the lodge smelled like cinnamon and cedar. Holiday music played gently in the background, and the fireplace roared with a curated kind of warmth. Allons banquetable. Set for 20 people. Stretched across the center of the room. Candles flickered between pine cones and hand-lettered name cards. I walked slowly, scanning the table. Kyle had a seat. Rachel had, of course, placed him right next to her with his name written in bold serif font. My mom Margaret had her spot at the head of the table. As always, with the label Maggie placed perfectly beside a mug of peppermint cocoa, Evanella, Rachel's teenage daughter, had a gold-edged card that read Ella the Elf. Because apparently, inside jokes were part of the aesthetic this year. I walked the full length of the table once, then again. Slower. My name wasn't there. I blinked hard, pretending it was just a momentary oversight. Maybe the card slipped. Maybe it fell. Maybe someone forgot to put it out. But I knew. I've always known. I took a deep breath. Set the bottle of Merlot I brought on the bar near the corner, and headed toward the back of the room where the stack of extra chairs sat against the wall. I chose one and carefully slid it near the edge of the table. Not quite in line with the others. No name card. No space carved out for me. I sat down in silence. From the kitchen, I heard Rachel's laugh sharp, self-aware. The kind she uses when she's holding court. She was talking about her latest paper on emotional reciprocity in modern households, the irony of which nearly made me laugh out loud. I was the one who had been showing up with reciprocity emotionally, financially, practically for years. But in our family, Rachel had the spotlight, and I held the flashlight steady for her. Always from behind. No one noticed when I walked in. No one looked up. No one asked where I'd been, and maybe that was the part that cut deepest, not that I was overlooked, but that it had become so normal for me to be invisible that they didn't even need to pretend anymore. 10 minutes passed. Guests started arriving: cousins, aunts, a few close friends of Rachel's who now called our family theirs, with the kind of confidence only people who had always been chosen get to carry. Tiffany, my second cousin, floated toward me with a flute of champagne and a bright grin. Oh hey, Luna, I didn't realize you still went by your married name. Thought you ditched that guy years ago, she said, holding up a place card that read Luna Carver. I froze. I did. 6 years ago. She looked confused. Oh. Maybe Rachel just used an old list. Of course she did. Rachel breezed past us a moment later, laughing, catching the tail end of the conversation. Oh, that, yeah. I copied everyone's info from a file I had from years ago. Didn't think it mattered. I smiled the kind of smile you practice in mirrors and customer service jobs, the one that says, "I'm fine," while your chest tightens. It usually doesn't, I replied. Until it does. No one responded. No one apologized. The conversation shifted, and I sat back down in my nameless chair, pretending like my stomach wasn't twisting with the kind of quiet shame that's hard to name because it wasn't about a name card, or a file, or even the wrong last name. It was about not being seen. I folded my hands in my lap, anchored myself with the familiar weight of pretending down, and let the noise of holiday cheer swell around me like wallpaper, pretty, distracting, and just loud enough to drown out the realization that I didn't belong at a table I helped build. Not truly. Not fully. And maybe not ever. I wish I could tell you that this was the first time something like this happened. That the missing name card was a one-off mistake. That being overlooked was new to me. But it wasn't. Not even close. See? I've spent years walking that tightrope between being supportive and being invisible. Last year, at our Christmas dinner, which took place in Rachel's townhouse in Palo Alto, I brought a handmade cranberry orange candle centerpiece I'd ordered weeks in advance. I remembered Rachel once saying she loved citrus scents during winter. When I handed it to her, she smiled stiffly. "Oh, thank you, but I already have a theme going. I'll save this for another time." She never did. I found it in the hallway closet months later when I helped her pack for her move. Still in the box. Never opened. The year before that, I offered to cook a roasted sweet potato side for the holiday potluck. I spent hours perfecting the recipe savory. Not too sweet. A hint of rosemary. I brought it warm and covered in foil. Rachel took one look and said, "Oh, we already have too many carbs. Let's just keep it in the kitchen. Maybe bring it out later." Later never came. I ate it cold. Alone. In her guest room after everyone left. But those were the surface cuts. The deeper ones happened over years. Layered under the surface like sediment, you don't notice until the weight starts cracking the foundation. When Rachel got her fellowship out east, she called me in tears. "Luna, I don't know what I'm going to do. Ella's only 3. I can't take her with me, not for the first semester at least. And Mom's? Well, you know how she is." I knew. So I moved into her house for 6 months. I took on morning drop-offs, bath time, preschool paperwork, midnight fevers, grocery lists. I squeezed it all in while juggling my own job, never once asking for anything in return. I remember one morning Ella sitting on the kitchen counter in her pajamas, covered in pancake batter. I was shaping the pancakes into stars and elephants just to make her laugh. She asked me why I wasn't a mommy. I told her I was still deciding, but that being her aunt made me really happy. She giggled and said, "I think you're like a bonus mommy." I smiled for the rest of that week. But when Rachel came back, she never asked how it went. She didn't ask if I was okay, or if I needed time to get back on my feet. She just resumed her role front and center like I'd been a placeholder, and maybe that's exactly what I was. Some people call it emotional labor. Some call it caretaking. I called it love. But now I'm starting to realize that love without recognition doesn't feel like love. It feels like currency that never gets counted. I was always the one Rachel called when things got tight, when rent was late, when daycare needed a deposit, when her fellowship stipend was delayed. And I always stepped in. Quietly. Discreetly. Without keeping score, because that's how I was raised to be dependable. Reliable. The one who kept the pieces together without making noise. But what no one ever said out loud is that when you become the one people rely on, they stop seeing you as someone who needs anything in return. They start treating your generosity like a feature of the background, always there. Like the rug beneath their feet. Not until it's pulled away do they realize it mattered at all. Back at the table in the lodge, someone mentioned how Rachel always had a gift for bringing people together. I bit the inside of my cheek. No one remembered who coordinated the Airbnb for Thanksgiving last year. No one mentioned who covered the wine and catering when Margaret had a back injury and couldn't host. No one asked who paid the vet bill for the family dog Rachel insisted on rescuing but forgot to feed. That's the thing about quiet labor, it makes everyone else louder. And you just fade. I once believed that if I just kept showing up, kept giving, kept sacrificing, someone would finally say, "Luna, I see you. I see how hard you try. Thank you." But that moment never came. It became easier for them to let me be the quiet one. The giver? The single one. The tech job aunt who always had extra to spare. What they didn't realize is that generosity without acknowledgement becomes resentment, wearing a polite smile. And that smile, it was starting to tremble. I sipped the sparkling cider, I poured myself and stared across the table at Rachel, laughing effortlessly. Surrounded by a circle of praise. She looked at home in the center of attention. And I realized I had built the stage, but I had installed the lights. I had written the script. And still, somehow, I wasn't part of the show. Not truly. Somewhere between the roasted pear salad and the second round of mulled wine, it happened. I was standing near the fireplace, quietly sipping my drink, pretending I didn't feel like a ghost at my own gathering. When my cousin Jeremy wandered over, grinning like he'd just found something hilarious. "Hey, Luna," he said, waving a card between two fingers like a playing card in a magic trick. "Didn't know you were still going by Carver. Thought that chapter closed years ago." He held up the card. "Luna Carver, my ex-husband's last name. A name I hadn't used in over 6 years." I blinked, forcing a smile. It did. "That's not my name anymore." Jeremy raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. "Who? Weird. This is what Rachel gave me when she asked me to set the table." I reached out, gently taking the card from him. The font was cheap, printed from a home office printer. Nothing like the hand-calligraphed place settings everyone else had. Mine was the only one without a gold edge. The only one that carried the weight of someone I'd worked hard to no longer be. Before I could respond, Rachel passed behind us. Catching a glimpse of the card in my hand, "Oh," that she laughed. Breezy as ever. "Yeah. I copied everyone's names from an old spreadsheet. Didn't think it mattered. Didn't think it mattered." That phrase lodged itself in my chest like a shard of glass. 6 years since I walked away from that marriage. 6 years since I rebuilt myself from the ashes of codependence, grief, and therapy sessions I never told the family about. 6 years since I reclaimed the right to define myself on my own terms. But to Rachel, to this table, to this family, I was still her version of me. Still frozen in some outdated file. I forced a small laugh. It usually doesn't, until it does. She didn't hear the shift in my tone. Or maybe she did and chose not to. Either way, she kept walking. Jeremy shrugged and headed back to his seat. I stood there, staring at the card, letting its cheap ink remind me just how easily people can erase your growth with a lazy click. It wasn't about the name. Not really. It was about what it meant, what it revealed. That I wasn't just forgotten, I was flattened. Reduced to a name I'd fought to release. A life I had outgrown. And no one had cared enough to update the record. It's funny how we talk about identity like it's this big philosophical thing, self-actualization. Empowerment. The journey of becoming, but sometimes it's as simple as what people call you, what they still see when they look at you, or worse, what they refuse to see. I went back to my seat, the nameless one I had pulled in from the shadows, and set the card down beside my plate. Face down. I didn't tear it up. I didn't make a scene. I just turned it over. Like I'd done with so many things in this family. Turn the moment. Turn the cheek. Turn the page. In the kitchen. Laughter rang out again. Rachel was telling a story about Kyle's family trip to Aspen. How he'd accidentally ordered a $300 bottle of wine, thinking it was a glass. The table erupted in laughter. Margaret wiped tears from her eyes, shaking her head at how charming he was. No one even noticed I wasn't laughing. Or sitting straight. Or present. That's the trick when you're the quiet one. People assume your silence is consent. They confuse endurance with indifference. I stared down at my plate. Watching the light from the candles flicker across the rim, everything around me felt curated Instagram perfect. The cloth napkins folded like origami. The eucalyptus runner laced between pine cones. The laughter rising and falling like rehearsed applause. And yet, beneath it all, a low hum of something else. Something raw. Something old. This wasn't just about tonight. It was about every time I let something go that shouldn't have been okay. Every time I swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. Every time I told myself, it's not a big deal. When it was about the wedding I helped pay for and wasn't in a single photo of. The college applications I edited at 2 a.m. without my name ever mentioned. The birthdays I made possible behind the scenes. While Rachel stood center stage blowing out candles, it was about how easily my presence became part of the furniture, reliable, unobtrusive, and ultimately forgettable. Until now, until this very moment, sitting in a chair I had pulled for myself, beside a place card that didn't even get my name right, surrounded by people who thought Luna Carver was still an acceptable way to define me, I looked around the room and wondered not for the first time if I'd ever actually belonged at this table. Or if I'd just been a very convenient extra set of hands. The truth landed like a quiet thud in my chest. They didn't forget who I was. They just preferred who I used to be. After dessert, while most of the family drifted toward the coffee station and the wine refills, I found myself quietly wandering down the side hallway near the coat closet. I wasn't escaping. At least, not exactly. I just needed a moment, a breath. A reason to not pretend I was still enjoying myself. That's when I saw it. A display. Beautifully arranged under a canopy of twinkling string lights. A wide corkboard covered in glossy 4x6 photographs, printed with care and precision. A handwritten sign above the board read in looping script, "Our family through the years." I paused at the edge of the group, huddled around it. Margaret, Kyle, Aunt Joni, and Rachel herself, all laughing at old photos. Pointing. Reliving moments like treasured artifacts. Their backs were turned. I didn't interrupt. I waited. Waited until they drifted off toward the cinnamon cookies and the vintage Irish cream Rachel insisted on ordering from Vermont. Then I stepped closer. The photos were arranged in clusters, like little islands of memory. There was Margaret in her garden, holding Ella as a baby. Rachel's graduation from Stanford. Hair Fellowship Award dinner. Her first book signing. Kyle and Rachel grilling in Tahoe 2 summers ago. Ella's science fair project from 8th grade. Her homecoming dress fitting, her soccer team in matching green uniforms. There were birthdays, anniversaries, backyard BBQs, and wine tastings. Handwritten labels under each photo gave context. Thanksgiving, 2019. Mom's 65th in Big Sur. Ella's Schweth grade art fair. And I stood there, staring. Not in a single one. Not one. I leaned in closer, scanning each row. I recognized moments because I had been there. I remembered setting up the tent for that BBQ week. I remembered holding Margaret's purse while she took photos with her high school friends at her birthday bash. I remembered being the one who brought the banner, the flowers, the freaking cake. But I wasn't in the frame. Not once. It was like I had been the person behind the camera every single time. Or worse, like I had never shown up at all. My heart thudded softly in my chest. Not out of panic, but realization. If you're not in the picture, do people eventually forget you were even in the room? I stood there for what must have been 5 minutes. Maybe more. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and thought I was just admiring the collage like everyone else. But I wasn't admiring. I was disappearing. Again. A voice pulled me from my thoughts. A woman I didn't recognize, probably one of Rachel's academic friends, stepped beside me. Glass of red wine in hand. That Michigan trip was such a blast. Wasn't it? I turned to look at her. Unsure how to answer, she smiled, pointing to a photo of Rachel and Kyle on a snowy cabin porch, bundled in coats and hot cocoa in hand. I'm not in that one, I said gently. She tilted her head, blinking. Really, I thought everyone was there. Not quite everyone, I replied. Then I stepped away before she could respond. Back in the main room, Ella had just unwrapped the new laptop I'd slid under her chair earlier that evening. I'd tied it with a silver ribbon and added a small handwritten note she never even opened. Margaret clapped lightly. Oh wow. That's fancy. Rachel laughed. No. It's from Luna. She's always trying to convert everyone into tech people. You know how she is? Ella looked up for a moment, smiled politely in my direction, and muttered a soft thanks. Before going right back to whatever she was doing on her phone, the box sat unopened in front of her like an afterthought. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee. It was bitter, flat like it had been sitting out too long. Kind of like me. There's a certain numbness that sets in after enough small cuts. You don't flinch anymore. You just note it, then tuck it away. Like a receipt you might need someday to prove something you wish you didn't. My thoughts drifted again. To Ella at 3 years old, climbing into my lap with pancake batter on her cheeks. To the nights I read her the same book 4 times because she loved the way I made the cat's voice meow. To teaching her how to double-click the mouse. To preschool drop-offs and show-and-tell rehearsals in the living room. But none of that was here. Not in the photos. Not in the stories. Not in the room. It wasn't just that I wasn't remembered. It was that I had been edited out. A few steps away. Someone laughed loud and hard. Someone else mentioned holiday plans for next year. A cousin debated whipped cream versus marshmallows in hot chocolate. None of it touched me. It passed around me like wind around a tree that had already shed all its leaves. I looked back one last time at the family photo wall. In the bottom right corner of the corkboard was a small white card, pinned like a caption. It read, "In Rachel's telltale cursive, family is, who shows up." I let out a breath through my nose. Not quite a laugh. Something between disbelief and detachment. I showed up. I whispered. Every damn time. But I didn't take the card down. I didn't unpin a photo. I didn't make a scene. I just walked back to my seat. The one with no name, The one I had to claim for myself, and I sat down quietly, politely, and perfectly erased. I was folding my napkin into perfect quarters when it happened. Someone had just brought out a tray of cookies, peppermint bark, gingerbread. Those buttery almond crescents Margaret made every year but always swore were too sweet to eat. Around the table, the conversation buzzed along effortlessly. Laughter, clinking glasses, a few kids underfoot, chasing each other between the chairs. High on sugar and freedom, Ella bumped into her cousin Max a little too hard, and one of them knocked over a napkin ring. That's when Rachel spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. With just enough volume to command attention, and just enough of a smile to feign innocence. She said kids shouldn't take up space. Laughter rippled around the table. Kyle let out his trademark booming chuckle. Margaret laughed into her wine glass. A few cousins snorted, some pretending to scold the kids while grinning. But I didn't laugh, because I saw exactly where their eyes landed. They weren't looking at Max, or Ella, or the other kids darting around like holiday sprites. They were looking at me. It wasn't even subtle. It wasn't even veiled. Rachel said it with the kind of practiced bite she'd mastered over the years, a way of twisting the knife so politely you didn't even feel the cut until you were bleeding. I didn't flinch. I didn't shift. I didn't say a word. Instead, I reached for my water glass. My finger steady. I took a slow sip, then set it down gently, and smiled. Not the kind of smile that soothes tension. Not the kind that invites forgiveness. Not the kind that says, "It's okay. I know you didn't mean it." No! This one was different. This was the kind of smile that says, "I see you. I see exactly what you're doing. And you're not going to get the reaction you're hoping for." Across the table, Margaret gave a light shrug, saying her default when she didn't want to get involved. "Oh, come on," she said to the room. "You know Rachel's just teasing." I didn't even turn to look at her. Because that's the thing with teasing. Right, teasing implies affection. Teasing assumes mutual understanding. That wasn't teasing. That was targeted, calculated, public. It was Rachel's way of reminding me again that I didn't quite belong here. That I wasn't a mother. That I wasn't partnered. That I wasn't central to this carefully arranged storybook version of family she'd constructed. She was reclaiming the spotlight in the only way she knew how, by dimming everyone else's. I looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't see my little sister. I didn't see the girl I used to braid hair for before school. Or the teen I stayed up with during her first heartbreak. I didn't see the struggling young mom who once leaned on me so hard, she nearly broke my spine. I saw a woman who had learned that if she made me the punchline, she could keep being the hero. And the room was complicit. With their chuckles. With their silence. With their eager return to safer topics. The joke passed quickly. Just another throwaway line in a night full of them. But for me, it landed like stone in water. Not loud, but heavy. And it kept rippling. Because something shifted in me in that moment, not dramatically. Not explosively, but permanently. You spend enough time pretending words don't sting. And one day you realize it's not because you've grown stronger. It's because you've gone numb. And I wasn't numb anymore. I was awake. Every time Rachel corrected my tone under the guise of just being honest, every time she turned a compliment into a dig, "Luna's great with spreadsheets. Just don't ask her about feelings." Every time she smiled while sweeping me aside with a story that made her the struggling protagonist and me the faceless support character. I had absorbed it all. Quietly. Willingly. Because I thought that's what family meant. But peace doesn't look like being erased. Peace looks like being respected. And in that moment, I realized I didn't have peace. I had performance. I glanced around the table, taking in the faces of people who had spent a lifetime letting Rachel's version of the story stand uncontested. People who benefited from the structure she built so long as someone else was footing the emotional bill. I didn't rise. I didn't storm out. But inside, I started packing. Not my coat. Not my purse. Just the last pieces of my permission. The permission I had been giving this family for years to shrink me, to flatten me, to ignore me in service of their comfort. That permission, it just expired. And they didn't even notice. Because the joke moved on. The laughter faded. The cookies were passed. And no one remembered what had been said except me. But that was okay. Because I remembered for both of us. The next morning, the house was still. Silence crept through the hallways like early Miss Soft. Almost sacred. The kind of quiet that only comes after the storm of a long holiday night. Leftover pies rested beneath foil covers. Abandoned wine glasses stood like ghostly reminders of conversations that had either meant nothing or everything. I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. It was bitter and too hot. But I needed it. Not for the caffeine, just for the ritual. For the grounding weight of something warm in my palms, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel out of place in this house. Not because I belonged, but because I had finally stopped trying to. It's strange how clarity doesn't come like thunder. It comes in whispers. Last night, after the kids shouldn't take up space joke, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't explain myself to anyone at the table. But I did stay awake long after the house had gone to bed. Lying on the lumpy guest room mattress with 1,000 thoughts crawling through me like ants. Thoughts I had buried for too long. I had spent years trying to make myself small enough to fit into someone else's story, Rachel's story. Margaret's story. The family story. I had believed that if I just stayed helpful, stayed quiet, stayed grateful, then maybe I'd earn my seat at the table. But here's what I finally understood. You don't earn a seat at a table that was never built for you. You build your own. And so, standing in the kitchen that morning, I did something small but sacred. I opened my phone, pulled up my notes app, and started typing a list. Things I want from my life. Not things I should want. Not things that look good on paper. Not things that make my family more comfortable. Just what I want. And the first item I typed to stop asking permission to matter. I didn't realize how radical that sentence would feel. Like I was handing myself keys to a door I didn't even know I'd locked. As I typed, footsteps padded into the kitchen. It was Ella. Her hair messy. Sweatshirt sleeves covering her hands. Still half asleep. She looked at me. Then at the coffee maker. Is there any left? I nodded. Fresh pot. Want me to pour you a cup? She blinked at me. Surprised, maybe at the softness in my voice. Or maybe just because no one else had been up. Sure, she mumbled. I handed her a mug and poured the coffee carefully. No sugar. Just milk. The way I remembered, she liked it when she was younger. She took a sip. Scrunched her nose slightly. Still kind of gross. I smiled. It always is at first. She glanced at me. Then leaned against the counter. You were really quiet last night, she said after a moment. Are you okay? That question's so simple. So unexpected, nearly undid me. I nodded slowly. I'm okay now. She looked down at her mug. Rachel's kind of intense sometimes. She says stuff that sounds funny to her. But her voice trailed off. I waited. But it's not always funny, she finally said. And just like that, something in the air shifted. She saw it. Maybe not all of it. Maybe not the weight I'd carried for years. But something, and it mattered. More than I thought it would. I didn't push it. I didn't turn it into a lecture or a moment to prove a point. I just said, "Thank you for saying that." She nodded, then took another sip of coffee. We stood in silence. Not awkward, just real. Just present. And that was enough. Later that day, when everyone else emerged from their rooms still yawning, still pie-dazed, I began packing my things. Slowly. Deliberately. Margaret passed me in the hallway. "You're heading out already." I zipped my bag. "Yeah. I think it's time." She didn't ask why. Maybe she knew. Or maybe she didn't want to know. Rachel appeared behind her, holding a glass of orange juice. Still in her robe. "Hope you had fun," she said with a tight smile. I looked at her for a moment. Really looked at her. And then I smiled. But not the tight, rehearsed smile she expected. This one was different. It came from somewhere quieter. Stronger. I did what I came to do. I said, I showed up. For myself? She blinked. Uncomprehending. But that was okay. It wasn't for her. I slung my bag over my shoulder and stepped outside. The air was crisp and cold. And for the first time in years, I felt warm from the inside out. I had pulled my own seat to their table. I had tasted the bitterness. I had endured the erasure. And now I was choosing something different. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Out of wholeness. Out of love. Because sometimes, the most radical thing a woman can do in a world that keeps trying to rewrite her story is to take the pen back and start writing again. On her own terms. It was a Tuesday. Not a holiday. Not a milestone. Just a plain, unremarkable Tuesday in January, the kind of day most people forget before it's over. But I'll never forget it. Because that was the day I said yes. Not to someone else. Not to an invitation. Or a favor. Or another task I didn't want to do. I said yes to myself. It started with a notebook. I was cleaning out a box of old papers, receipts, birthday cards, expired coupons, and I found it buried underneath a stack of unused holiday wrapping paper. The leather cover was cracked, and the elastic band had long since given up. But when I opened it, there she was. Me? Not the polished version. Not the family-approved version. Just Luna. Messy handwriting. Pages smudged with coffee and tears. Half sentences that bled into poetry. Dreams scribbled between to-do lists. Rage coiled beside tenderness. I held the notebook in my hands for a long time. Then I started to read, and for the first time in what felt like years, I heard myself again. She was still there, the girl who used to write at sunrise. Who filled her backpack with books. Who once dreamed of starting a community workshop for women who felt invisible. That girl hadn't died. She'd just been put on mute. But now, I was ready to turn the volume back up. I closed the notebook slowly and whispered the words that cracked something open in me. I miss you. And that was it. That was the beginning. The first yes. That afternoon, I walked to the little library 3 blocks from my apartment. I hadn't been there in years. Not since before the divorce. Not since I stopped believing I had anything valuable to say. But the woman at the front desk, Sandra, recognized me immediately. "Luna Carver," she asked. "Didn't you used to run those writing circles?" I blinked. "Yeah. A long time ago." Her eyes lit up. We still get calls asking about those. Something inside me swelled. Surprise. Warmth. Grief. Joy. People still remembered, people had cared, and more than that, I had made something that mattered. Sandra leaned in. You ever think about starting them again? That question sat with me the whole walk home. I didn't answer right away. I let it breathe. I gave it space. But the next morning, I emailed her. The subject line was simple: let's talk about the writing circle. And just like that, something shifted. Not in a grand, cinematic way. There were no dramatic speeches or slow-motion montages. Just small moments. Steady steps. One coffee meeting turned into a planning session. A planning session became a flyer. A flyer became a room full of women, each with a pen, a notebook, and a story they didn't know they were ready to tell. We met every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Some weeks, there were only 3 of us. Other weeks, we needed extra chairs. We laughed. We cried. We wrote things we didn't think we were brave enough to write. But more than that, we were seen. One woman, Gina, wrote about surviving breast cancer and not recognizing her body anymore. Another, Carla, shared poems she'd hidden under her mattress since she was 16. And then there was me. I wrote about family and about silence, about trying to belong in rooms that didn't want me whole. And with every word, every sentence, every page, I started coming back to life. This wasn't about proving anything to Rachel or reclaiming my seat at some dinner table. This was about building a table of my own. And here, in this circle, there was room for everyone. Even me, especially me. People started asking if I'd ever consider turning the writing circle into something bigger. A podcast. A series of workshops. A book. But I wasn't in a rush. For once in my life, I wasn't chasing the next milestone. I was soaking in the now. That was the real success, not the scale. Not the applause, but the quiet sense of alignment. Of waking up in the morning and knowing I was walking towards something that felt true. Of not needing anyone else's permission to take up space. Of looking in the mirror and not flinching. One night, after everyone had left the circle, I sat alone in the library conference room. The lights were dim. The air smelled faintly of paper and peppermint tea. And I felt peaceful. I looked at the stack of journals on the table. Mine was on top, dog-eared, smudged, alive. I opened to a blank page. At the top, I wrote, "Dear Luna, thank you for not giving up on me," because that's what this was. Not a comeback. Not a reinvention. But à réunion. With myself. It had been 6 months since I started the writing circle. 6 months of watching strangers become sisters. Of tears spilled between paragraphs. Of laughter rising over stories once buried in shame. I thought I had turned a page. I thought I had moved on. But healing isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. Sometimes, you find yourself revisiting old rooms. Sometimes, the door opens on its own. That door opened for me on a rainy Thursday. When I let my phone ring twice before picking it up, half expecting it to be one of the women asking if we were still meeting despite the storm. It wasn't. It was Rachel. Her voice was shaky. Smaller than I'd ever heard it. Luna y froze. My fingers tightened around the phone. She hesitated. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. But something happened. And I didn't know who else to call. There it was, that familiar pull. The instinct to drop everything and run to fix things. The old script. But I didn't jump in right away. I let her speak. She told me about the diagnosis, Her youngest, Lily, 5 years old, had been coughing for weeks. What they thought was just allergies turned out to be more. I didn't catch every detail. My ears rang. When she finished, there was silence. For the first time in a long time, Rachel wasn't polished or defensive. She wasn't performing. She was just scared. And somehow, she'd called me. Not Margaret. Not her polished book club friends. Me. I didn't say it's okay. Because it wasn't. I didn't say I forgive you. Because I hadn't. But I said something honest. I'm here. And those 2 words, simple. Quiet felt heavier than anything I'd written in months. She broke down on the other end of the line. Not theatrically. Not loudly. Just quietly. The kind of cry you don't plan. That night, I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't jump into savior mode. Instead, I sat with myself. I made tea. I journaled. And I asked the question I had avoided for years: what kind of relationship do I want with Rachel, if any at all? The truth, I didn't want to go back to what we had. But I wasn't ready to let go of the chance to create something new on my terms. 2 days later, I met her at the children's hospital. She looked exhausted. Makeup half done. Hair in a messy bun. Wrinkles she used to obsess over now forgotten. She hugged me too tightly. For once, it didn't feel like a performance. In Lily's room, the air smelled like antiseptic and cartoon fruit snacks. Machines beeped in a soft rhythm. Lily smiled when she saw me. "Ouncy Luna," she whispered. My heart cracked wide open. I sat by her bed and read from a storybook I found on the shelf, something about a brave fox and a magical forest. Her little hand wrapped around mine like ivy. Fragile, but anchored. Rachel sat in the corner. Arms folded tightly. Watching. Not controlling. Not correcting. Just watching. When Lily fell asleep, Rachel whispered, "You're good with her." Always were. I didn't respond. She looked down. "I don't know how to say this, but I'm sorry. For everything. For the way I treated you. For the things I said. For not seeing you." Her voice cracked. "I think I was jealous. You were free in ways I didn't let myself be, and instead of honoring that, I punished it." The words hung between us. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't say, "It's okay," to make the moment easier. Instead, I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. A small crack in the wall we had both helped build. That night, I went home and cried, not because I was hurt, but because I was proud. I had stayed rooted in myself. I had shown up without abandoning me. And maybe, just maybe, Rachel was ready to do the same. We didn't become best friends overnight. There were still awkward silences. Still moments when I questioned everything. But over time, we started talking, not through family gossip or surface-level updates, but through truth. I sent her a link to one of my writing circle videos. She sent back a message. I watched it twice. "You're incredible." And this time, I believed her. Because I didn't need her to say it anymore. But I could finally receive it. That was the difference. Not waiting for others to validate your worth, but being open when they finally recognize it. I never imagined I'd walk onto a stage with a microphone in my hand. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because for most of my life, I thought no one would care to listen. Yet there I was, standing backstage at the City Women's Collective Conference. Clutching my note cards like they were lifelines. There were 300 people in the audience. Most of them strangers. A few familiar faces: Sandra from the library. A couple of women from the writing circle. Even Aya, who had flown in from Seattle just for this. I could feel the thump of the bass from the opening song vibrating through the floor. My heart was beating in sync with it. Fast and heavy. They had invited me to speak about storytelling, healing, and reclaiming your voice after years of silence. It sounded beautiful in the email. It felt terrifying in real life. The woman before me had just wrapped her talk, something powerful about breaking the cycle of generational trauma. The applause was still echoing when the stage manager gave me a gentle nod. My turn. I walked out. One step at a time. The spotlight was brighter than I expected. But I wasn't blinded by it. I saw faces. Eyes. People waiting not to judge but to receive. And so I did what I had learned to do in the quiet hours between 6:30 and 8:00 p.m. on Thursdays. I told the truth. Hi. My name is Luna. A pause? And then I spent over 30 years thinking my worth was determined by how well I made other people comfortable. A few heads nodded. I breathed in. I learned to be the helper. The extra chair at the table. The reliable one who cleaned up. Took the photos. Made the pies. And I told myself that if I just kept showing up quietly, selflessly, someone would finally look me in the eye and say, "You belong here." I could see a few women wipe their eyes already. But here's the thing about waiting for someone to grant you permission to matter. It's a long, lonely wait. I let the silence hold that truth. Then I told them about the notebook I found. About the writing circle. About the small, radical act of saying yes to myself again and again, even when no one clapped. Even when no one noticed. And then I said this: we spend so much time asking, am I enough for them? But maybe the better question is, are they enough for me? A wave of murmurs. A shift in energy. I could feel it like a room full of women straightening their spines all at once. I told them about Rachel. About Lily. About the power of truth, spoken gently. About forgiveness that doesn't rush but ripens. And then, at the very end, I read something I had written just 3 nights before. A short letter to the woman who's sitting in the back, wondering if her story is too small, too messy, too strange to matter. I see you. You are not invisible. You are not too late. You are not broken beyond repair. You are sacred. You are becoming army. And you don't need permission to begin. I closed my notes. The applause didn't come right away. For a few seconds, there was just silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty but full. And then, the room stood up. The clapping was thunderous. But I didn't need it. The real applause had already happened inside me. The moment I had walked out there. The moment I had stayed present. The moment I had spoken not for approval. Not for applause. But because truth is worth telling. Later that day, a girl no older than 20 came up to me. I brought my mom to this, she said, eyes shining. She's never heard anyone say what you said today. She held my hand the whole time. I smiled. I'm so glad you both came. She nodded. Then leaned in. Thank you for going first. Those words hit deep. Because that's what this journey had become, not just healing for me, but a lantern in the dark for someone else. I had spent so many years looking for a seat at someone else's table. But now I was building tables. With room for others. And one empty chair, always just in case another woman walks in carrying her story. Unsure if anyone will care to hear it. She will find a place. Because I found mine. It was a quiet Sunday morning. No stage. No lights. No applause. Just me. My journal. And a patch of sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. Warming the tile beneath my feet. I had just finished brewing my coffee, the kind I used to rush through while thinking about 100 other things. But not today. Today, I sat, I breathed, and I listened to the stillness. 6 years ago, I wouldn't have recognized this version of myself. Back then, I was a shadow of who I am now. A people pleaser in pretty shoes. A smile that didn't always reach the eyes. A name in someone else's story, but never the author of my own. But today, I am Luna. Not just in name, but in truth. I've written hundreds of pages, hosted dozens of circles, spoken on stages, and sat across from strangers who became sisters. But none of it would have happened without one hard truth I had to face. Healing doesn't happen when you're loved. It begins when you love yourself, especially when no one else does. I remember the moment it clicked. It wasn't during a big speech or a dramatic event. It was when I caught my own reflection in the mirror one morning. Toothbrush in hand. Sleep still in my eyes, and I whispered, "You're doing okay." It wasn't grand. It was honest. Because for years, I had stood in front of that same mirror tearing myself apart. Too much, not enough, too loud, too quiet, too emocional, too cold. But that day, I didn't edit myself. I just saw me. The woman who had survived heartbreak. The woman who had rebuilt herself from scraps of paper, ink, and late-night tears. The woman who had stopped asking for permission and started creating her own space. And I cried not out of sadness, but out of awe. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is come home to yourself. I think about all the women I've met since, each with a different story. But the same ache in their eyes. The ache of trying to hold the world together while falling apart silently inside. We are taught to sacrifice, to accommodate, to shrink. But what if just for a moment we were taught to listen? Not to the voices that say be good, be nice, bless, but to the voice inside that says, I'm still here. I have something to say. I matter. That voice, that's the one I follow now. And here's the beautiful thing: when you follow that voice, you give others permission to follow theirs. You become a lighthouse without even trying. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. You cry. You doubt. You stumble. But you rise anyway. Not for applause. Not for validation. But because something inside you refuses to stay silent any longer. To the woman listening right now, maybe on her lunch break. Maybe in her car. Maybe with tears running down her face. I want to say something. You are not too late. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are in the middle of your story. And every great story has a turning point. Yours might be today. Maybe this is the day you dust off the journal. Or call the therapist. Or tell the truth first to yourself. Then to someone else. Maybe this is the day you stop auditioning for rooms that were never built for you. Maybe this is the day you build your own. All I know is this: the life I have now. It's not perfect. But it's mine. It's built from authenticity, not obligation. And when I lay my head down at night, I don't wonder if I was enough. Because I always was. And so are you. So here's my last message to you, not as a speaker, not as a storyteller, but as a fellow traveler. Tell the truth. Take up space. Begin again, no matter how late it feels. The world needs your voice. But more importantly, you need it. So speak. Even if it shakes, even if it's quiet at first, even if no one claps right away. Speak. Because your story doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. It just has to be yours. And trust me, that's more than enough.